Hello, everybody. We started 2022 pretty strong when one of my friends in the ecosystem, Mary Tagler, invited me to present at Chicago Salesforce Saturday. I got super excited. And, immediately I asked them what would they like me to focus on. And they wanted me to present on record triggered flows. And I presented on record triggered flows quite a number of times. And, you can find these recordings also on my YouTube channel here. I wanted to do things a little bit differently this time and, make this resemble more like a live low code session. And I asked the Chicago Salesforce Saturday folks to actually throw their requirements at me. Well, they didn't really challenge me that much, thank God, but we had a fantastic session together. And we have the recording for it. We have played with record triggered flows. We have played with async paths and we went into all kinds of detail around record triggered flows. You are going to enjoy this one. Let's go into the recording, shall we? So you go to your setup to get to your flow builder, and then I usually type in my quick search flow, and then this is the screen I get to, right? So this is a preview instance for Spring 22. So what you're looking at is Spring 22, and that's why you have a button here called Flow Trigger Explorer. This is brand new, and we are going to look at that very briefly later on. I don't want to overcomplicate things, but what you're going to be seeing here is a typical list view of different types of flows that you may have in your system. And this is exactly the same functionality that you would see if you looked at your accounts, contacts, and you're looking at a list view, right? It's very similar. You can decide which columns go on here. You can have multiple different list views. You can create one, and you can pin one. We don't have folder functionality in Flows yet, so I would highly recommend, if you're working with Flows in a team, and if you have very many flows in your list view, I would highly recommend you actually add keywords into your label, and you can actually filter for them. So for example, it looks like I have done this in a previous session where, I used the acronym for hands-on training, HOT, and I created a list view that filters for that. When I pull this up, I'm going to only see the flows that have HOT in their label. So when you want to create a new flow, you would go to your new flow button and click on it. And you are going to be presented with multiple options. And this is where it already gets complicated for many people, right? Too many choices. Now, the most important thing for new beginners, learners, that they need to realize is the flow functionality is quite broad. When compared to workflow rules and process builders, it can do various different things. It's much bigger in terms of functionality. And the way I can explain that in a very simple way is, you see all these different options here, right? And the record triggered flow, one of these types, is the corresponding functionality to process builder. All the rest of the stuff over here, none of these can be done in process. So record triggered flow is the functionality where you kick off a process, you launch a process when a record is created, updated, or deleted. So let's focus on that, right? So to create a record triggered flow, we'll just pick this option here in our quick choice component and click on create. And if you're still in the current release, you are not working in Spring 22, you are going to be presented with two options. One of them is going to be the freeform. The other one is going to be the auto layout option. I think that's the next screen that should pop up. But the auto layout option used to be in beta, and with Spring 22, it's actually going to be generally available. And I think now the flow builder defaults to auto layout, and it doesn't ask you that question. That doesn't stop you from changing from one to another, though. I'll show you that one in a moment. So when you are building a record triggered flow, your start element and the choices that you make at the beginning are quite important. Now, when you're working with a record triggered flow, the first decision you have to make is which object records I'm going to be running this record triggered flow on. So I'm going to select here accounts. So I want to run this record triggered flow whenever an account gets created. I can actually run it when an account record is created, when an account record is created or updated, or when a record is deleted. So those are my choices. And then I can set also entry conditions. And these entry conditions are actually quite important. When you use your entry conditions effectively, you are going to keep your Salesforce org quite performant. Because when you start narrowing down your criteria in your entry conditions, what you're telling Salesforce is, I don't really want to run my flow whenever a record is created. I only want to run my flow, launch my flow, when a record is created and all these conditions evaluate to true. So you are going to decrease the number of times you are running your record triggered flow throughout the day. And if you're dealing with 1,000 call center agents, 200 salespeople in the field, and you are creating a record triggered flow that launches when an account is created, you may be running it many times throughout the day, which could cause performance implications, let's say. So, and the other important thing, I'm not going to set an entry condition for now, but just so you know, and you can see, once I click one of these, I can click either the conditions are met, the condition is met, or I can either use the AND operator or operator, or I can also define what my logic is going to be in a custom way. I can write it out. So usually the most typical scenario is that I would pick AND, I would specify what one of the field values need to be for this count record triggered flow to run. I'm going to leave that out for now. And then this is a very important decision over here as well. Now we have either fast field updates on the left side or actions and related records on the right side. Now, if you're building flows for a while, you'll remember you used to select and specify whether your flow is going to be run before save or after save. So this is not different in terms of functionality, it's just renamed. Salesforce is trying to make it simple, especially for new beginners to understand how to make that selection over here, because it's a difficult one. But if you've gotten used to selecting with before save and after save, you are going to see in the explanation here in italic letters that this one says before and this one says after. So this one is your before save flow, the other one is your after save flow. And the difference is this one is super fast and efficient, but it actually intervenes with the process that updates your record values and commits it to the database, and it makes the changes while your field values actually are on the way to the database to commit. So you change field values before the user can update that on the database. It's super efficient, super fast, but at the same time, the implication is that you cannot work with the related records, especially when we are talking about the record trigger where a record is created. This is an area where the record has not been created yet in the database, which means the record doesn't even have a record ID, which also means that the record cannot be related to another record. If you don't have a record ID for a record, your lookup or your master detail relationship field on the other record cannot have the record ID of that record that you're triggering on. So whenever you have to work with related records, you have to be in this space over here, which is after save. What are specific examples? For example, you want to create a task that's going to be associated with this account. You want to create an account that's going to be associated with this account. You want to get all the cases related to the account. Obviously, that case would be not for the creation. That would be for update, for example. If you had an existing account and you wanted to trigger on an update, then if you wanted to look up all the cases that are related to that account, you could do that over here. You could do updates on those cases. All those are going to be done over here. And the fast field updates, as the title and name suggests, they are going to be on the left side over here. And what that actually means is pretty much your workflow fast field update, which is change a field value based on a certain condition, just a simple update. Well, what could those be? For example, if an account is a large account, go ahead and update the priority to high. If an account is has a budget over, let's say, like a revenue over $1 million, go ahead and mark that account hot. Things like that, you know, rating, grading. Another common use case would be, we use this quite a bit with opportunities, cases, and some of the related custom records, would be auto naming. If you wanted to put together a couple of field values and the date, the current date, and then create a record name for your record, then you would be, again, in this space. That would be a very fast and efficient way of doing things. And then we get another option here, include an async path to do certain operations, and we'll get to that. This is an advanced functionality that we can get to further. So do you have any questions so far?
There are none in the chat, Andy.
Okay, let's move on and then create a simple one. So this is your start element after you go through that selection process. Your start element is going to show the object count whenever, and it's going to show the trigger is going to be in case a record is created. And it is going to be optimized for fast field updates. So you can see all those in your start element. This is brand new. I can again click quickly here and go to my Flow Trigger Explorer. And I'll show you why that could be a nice option later. So right now, as you can see, as I just told you a couple minutes ago, we are in auto layout automatically, but we can actually change back and forth here between auto layout and freeform. Essentially, auto layout is going to keep all your elements nicely organized on your canvas. At the same time, it changes the way you add new elements onto your canvas. So you would actually use this plus sign over here to add a new element. if you are in Freeform, you are going to decide where all the elements go manually, and you would drag your elements from the left side onto your canvas. Like, for example, decision step, if I drop it over here, it's just going to be placed right here, wherever I want it. So let's go to auto layout. Auto layout works fairly well. So I actually use auto layout most of the time. And there are not really any issues going back and forth. If there are some things that you cannot really do effectively on auto layout, you can just switch to Freeform. And I think there are still a few tail cases where you go to Freeform, do something, and then your auto layout cannot possibly render what you're doing on the Freeform side. Possibly, I'm not exactly sure. I haven't tested it inside out.
There are a few cases. I have one I just ran into, but I would say make sure you save before trying to toggle, because it requires a save before you turn it on and off. I've been burned by that.
Yes. I mean, compared to previous functionality, the Canvas and the Flow Builder, they work pretty well. I mean, they don't give you a lot of trouble, but I still save versions quite frantically, like the early days of Microsoft Word. So I actually like to keep versions. You can have a maximum of 50 versions of your flow. And then if you hit capacity, you can start deleting the previous versions. That's not really a huge problem. So now we are here. What we are going to do is we are going to, let's do this. Let's do a decision here. And then in our decision, check a field value and then update another field based on that field value. That's what we have discussed. That would be a good use case, right? So let's see what we can evaluate. Rating would be a good one probably to update. And another one here is, I think there was an annual revenue one, right? Yes. So what we can do is we can actually look at the annual revenue, and then we can make a rating decision based on that, right? So that would be a good use case for this. Now, to be able to do that, I need to evaluate a field value that's on the record that triggered the flow, right? And you know, we have a syntax, we have a notation in Flow to refer to the field value of the record that triggered the flow, and that would be the $record record variable. When you click on your picker over here, you are going to see you are presented with multiple options. You'll see global variables, and these global variables could be anything from flow current date and time that you can use in reference if you are doing date time operations and things like that. The profile that is running actually the flow and things like that. But here you see the $record, and when you click on it, this arrow over here tells you that it's a record variable, which means it's a full set of fields that you would find in a standard account of your org. And those field values are going to be accessible for you. So if you click on this one over here, you are going to see all the field values in an account as it's defined on your org, and you're going to be able to refer to them. And then you'll pick the annual revenue here. And then, you know, the canvas, the flow builder actually renders a certain visualization of that field value for your $record, and then, you know, right arrow, annual revenue. But if you click on it, you'll see how it's actually typed up. You can actually copy and paste this one and carry this one somewhere else in your flow as well, you know, to build formulas or, you know, to refer to it in another picker dialog. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, well, if dollar record annual revenue is greater than 1 million, then I want to actually rate this account differently, right? So I'm going to make a rating decision. So I'm going to say here, is this a large account? And what I usually do with my decision elements is I would actually start those usually, if it's a yes and no decision, I would start the outcomes usually with yes and no. I would say yes, large account. And you don't really have to rename your default outcome, but I do. No, not large. So now we have evaluated whether this is a large account or not. We get two paths, and under the yes large account path, what I want to do is I want to do an update here. And I'm going to update the account. And here you'll notice when you are in before save, or as it is called nowadays, fast field update environment, then you are going to see your update element will look the same as after save or update related records and actions side, but you are going to have all these different options, the second and third option, all grayed out. The only operation you can do here is use the account record that triggered the flow and update its field values. If you want to update field values for any other records, as we've discussed a few minutes ago, you have to be on the other side, actions and related records side, after save side. So we can actually define here further requirements and, filter conditions. We're not going to do that. So we're going to say the rating of this account is going to be, and the nice thing about the flow dialog here is whenever you choose a pick list on the left side, you are going to see the possible pick list values here to pick from. You don't really have to remember or type Freeform. So I'm going to, let's say if it's a large account, I want to start them off with warm setting and then evaluate, possibly do some actions, evaluate and see whether I can do business with this account, because I want to target large accounts doing revenue more than 1 million a year, right? So, and I would do this. And if the account is not large, I don't really want to do anything. So this is going to be the way I'm going to leave this. And I'm going to save my flow, which is going to prompt me to name my flow. And I can say, wait, large accounts. Warm record triggered flow. So I saved my flow. If you want to be able to use it and test it, I mean, you can debug it without activating, but if you're going to test it in your org and see whether it works with a record that you're going to create, you want to activate it. So let's do the debug first. And let me just go back to the accounts here. And can I test it with an existing account? Although it is going to trigger on create. We'll see that one. Let's find out. Account. Do you see the annual revenue here? I think it's not on the page layout, is it?
I'm not seeing it. You might have to control F to. I see expected revenue.
Do we have expected revenue? Oh, that's interesting. I did not know that. This is an opportunity. Wait.
Yeah,
Sorry
I think
about that.
expected revenues auto-calculated based on amount.
Yeah. I'm on the account is this one right here. Right here, we have it on the page layout. So let's say the annual revenue for Dentco is $2 million, right? Did I do that right? I think I did. Okay. And then let's see if we can debug it. So I'm going to skip the start condition requirements because the start conditions actually run on create, and I'm going to point it to the account that I have just updated having $2 million annual revenue, and I'm going to run it. And this is the nice thing about, sometimes I get shocked because I get folks saying, well, I still couldn't get used to the flow builder. I keep building processes. And why do you want to do that? You're completely blindfolded. Never mind the ugly interface. You don't really get to see this. Look at this. This is beautiful. Like you can see the path that your flow took highlighted. So this record evaluated as a large account record, and it went down this path, and it updated the account as warm, most probably. I cannot see that here, but I can see it on the right side in my debug log. Are the letters big enough for you? Let me see. Is that better?
That's better.
Okay.
It's great.
Let's do it this way. Now, here on the right side, we get the debug log, and this used to be just a bunch of long, letters and statements and that kind of stuff. So it got organized with, I think, with the last release with these tabs, which is nice. It makes it more readable. You can expand this, and you can see who ran this flow when, on which record, and then you can see how your decision evaluated. You can see what field value is when this record ran through your flow. So the field value for this record was $2 million, and that's greater than $1 million. So it's going to go down the large account path. It says it went down the large account path right here. And you are going to also see that your update step updated the record that triggered the flow, and you are going to see the field values here that it took. And here, yes, right here, I can see the rating was set to warm in this update step. And then because the flow ran in rollback mode, the changes were backed out and the interview got finished. So perfect. It means we don't really have an issue with this flow. It should run perfect. We can activate it. And once we activate it, we can also test it, or we can also use it, see it in action on this side. So this was going to run on create, which means, let me just refresh my screen here and show you that it didn't really update that record, the Dentco, because it rolled back all the changes it ran in the debug mode. You'll see here that the rating, where's the rating? Yes, right here, that the rating value is not set. Let's do actually an update on this account and make sure that our flow doesn't really run on update, because we set it up to run on create only. And again, once we updated this side over here, it didn't update the rating based on the annual revenue. I would have to create a new account for that to come into effect. So
one thing I'll add while Andy does the update is, while the rollback is a feature of Flow, always make sure you're doing this in a sandbox and don't do it in production.
Nice. Good reminder. And when you're, and there are certain flows though, where rollback option is auto-selected and you cannot deselect it, and the other way around. So also pay attention to that dialogue, you know, like you make a conscious choice when you're debugging whether you want to roll back or not. So let's call this one Chicago. I can't type today. Chicago Saturday, right? And the annual revenue for this one is going to be $3 million. And I'm going to save this account. And this account is going to be rated warm. Let's create another one. And this one should be Jack Saturday. And with the annual revenue of 500,000. And save. And go to the details. You'll see the rating value has not been assigned at all. So any questions so far? Okay. What do you want me to try next?
Could we go back and edit this flow, and because it's 500,000, make it the rating cold? I'm assuming we can.
Yes.
Let's
do that.
On the no side.
Yes, let's do that. Definitely. Now, before we do that, I'm going to do that. Before we do that, let me just tell you one thing. Where was my flow? This is the HOT view. That's why. All flows. This is our flow. One thing I want to also remind folks now, when you're dealing with many versions of one flow, sometimes things get complicated. Now, when you click on this one right here, it is going to take you to the version that's active, if the flow is active. And that version may be a previous version. That's completely technically possible. So I would highly recommend you go into the habit of going to your view details and versions when you're working with flows with different versions, and see all the versions listed here, which one is active, which one you would like to edit. We have only one version so far, so that's not really a huge issue, but you know, it may get a little bit complicated. So I would open my flow from here. So let me show you one thing. Is this the flow I was working on? Yes. It just changed the look of it a little bit because this not large side was not really doing anything, but they were actually merging together and then ending in a stop. So it just changed the view a little bit once I opened it again. Now, before we do this path over here, this side over here, I want to remind you one thing. Now, what we have just done and created is a flow that runs every time an account is created, but only makes a change if the account's annual revenue is more than $1 million. So how can I make this flow better and more performant? Any suggestions and ideas?
Can we move our decision into the start element?
Yes, exactly. So here we are actually evaluating whether this is a large account, and on this path not doing anything, which means this. I'm running the flow every time an account is created, and you know, a certain ratio of those times I'm not actually doing anything, which is a waste of resources. You don't really want to trigger your flow if you're not going to be doing anything. So A better way of doing this would be this. Let me just save this as a new version. And I'm going to go into my start element, and I'm going to say, I want to evaluate here what the annual revenue is. And if it's greater than $1 million, I want to run this flow. If it's not greater than $1 million, I don't really want to run this flow at all. And then this decision element here is redundant. I can totally delete this element. It's going to ask me, which path do you want to keep? I want to keep the yes large account path. And I have a simpler and a more efficient flow now. And it is going to generate the same outcome. So I can save this version and activate it and test it. But it's going to give me the same outcome. Any questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so I'm going to back out of here and then build the suggestion that we just had, which is like, I want to also update the account with cold, right? That was the request. So I'm going to go to the previous version and open that version. And I'm going to save that as a new version. Remember, when you do that, it's going to generate a new version, and that's going to be marked as the newest version, meaning, the last version I built was 2. I opened 1, but I'm going to save it as a new version. I'm going to get that 3, right? 3 is going to be my latest one. And I'm going to make changes here. So this is the version where I still have the decision element. So I have a no, not large. And I want to also mark the account as cold if it's not large. Now, I highly recommend when you do things like that to go into your decision element and evaluate for it specifically rather than going into the default outcome, which is no, not large. So I would actually say I'm going to evaluate, and I'm going to say this is a small count. Now, the yes and no actually don't really make that much sense, so we probably need to change that naming. Let's call it large account here. And let's call it small account. And let's call this one for, let's call it not large or small. Now, this is, again, one of the areas that is quite more powerful on the flow side when you compare it to process. Your decisions in process are quite primitive. You'll evaluate, you'll put in a decision, you'll evaluate, you'll say, okay, is this a large account? And then if that's not a large account, you'll put in another decision that will say, is this a small account? Is this a medium-sized account? So you'll have all these different decision elements on the process side. If you are evaluating 3 times, you'll have 3 decision elements. That's not what you do here. You need only 1 decision element, and you can have different outcomes that are defined by criteria that you're going to determine here. So here, what I'm going to say is I'm going to evaluate if dollar record annual revenue is smaller than, I think we did greater than last time, so it needs to be less or equal, not to leave a gap here, 1 million, then this is going to be small. So let's see, check that here. This is greater than, this is less than or equal. And if And none of these are true. I mean, in this case, actually, other than the field value not being set, there shouldn't be anything that's actually not covered by these two, but just in case, we'll do it like this, and then we'll leave the default outcome again without any action or without any updates, and we'll just update here. So we'll just say, okay, well, update the triggering record, and this time I'm going to call it update account small, and the rating is going to be cold, right? Is that what was requested? You want to mark it cold?
Yeah, or small. Yeah, I didn't realize we didn't have sizes. So yeah, I would.
Yeah,
guess.
I mean, this is, we are actually kind of using this field not the way it was intended. Normally, you wouldn't really make a decision on whether an account is large and then automatically mark it warm, hot, or cold. Those are two different things. But, you know, I'm working with the existing field values here. So
Yeah.
let's do it that way. And I'm going to save this here and activate this version. Remember, we had a version 1 active. So I'm on version 3. I can see my version here. And then when I hit activate here, this is going to be active and the previous version is going to deactivate itself. So now we are here and we can test this. This still runs on create. So you Salesforce Saturday account, and the annual revenue for this one is going to be 200,000. Save. So you can see that the rating updated cold now. Now let's create another one. Accounts, new, where we don't actually give that account an annual revenue number. It's not a required field, so I can actually completely skip it. And then I'm going to see it's also marked as cold. That's interesting. I didn't expect that to happen.
Yeah, I would have thought it would have done nothing, right?
Wait a minute. So the thing about decision elements in Flow is it is going to evaluate all the outcomes in sequence. So it's going to update large, and then it's going to update small. It's going to evaluate. It's going to evaluate large. It's going to evaluate small, and it's going to evaluate not large or small. So it evaluated. It wasn't large. It evaluated here, and it assumed that. I mean, I would expect that value to be null, not 0. So in that case, I wouldn't think that it would update cold, but that's interesting. So let's debug it here, see what we can see. Skip start conditions. You see here, the rollback mode cannot be deselected. So if you're debugging a record triggered flow, you have to be in rollback. So, and then we are going to see explicitly here what it does. And outcome conditions, yes, dollar record annual revenue is null. Greater than 1 million, didn't evaluate. Larger, and skip this outcome.
Do you have to say for that last one though, like instead it says less than or equal than 1 million, which it is, but maybe greater than null?
No, I can do a null check totally, but I had no idea. I haven't come across this. In a currency field, null actually evaluates as less than a certain number. Apparently it does. Yes. Well, let's build for that though. Yeah, we can totally do that. And that will also illustrate the way decisions work.
Can I ask one more question? Because I seem to have missed the step. So I don't understand when you were putting the decision up in the start versus the decision.
You don't understand the difference, right?
Right. Yeah. Like why
Okay.
wouldn't we start this flow there? Does that make sense what I'm asking? I somehow missed the why. I apologize.
Okay.
Why you would move it to a start?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, if you have a simple enough set of criteria where the flow will only listen for specific things, move it to the start. Otherwise, the flow will at least run, and it might run and end immediately instead. So you're basically, to Andy's point, you were preserving resources.
Okay.
Because
that's right.
It's not even like it would listen, and it's like if it's listening for a specific field value, say, and there's no field value, it's like, okay, I don't have to do anything. Whereas if it's listening for a change on an account, it has to run and then say, oh, the decision is this field has to be filled out, but it's not. And then it stops right away. So you've actually run a flow, even though you don't see any actions happening on the front end.
And so in this case, why didn't we move it up? Right.
Okay.
That's the piece.
Once your logic gets more complicated, it's harder to put it all in the start, in my opinion.
No, that's a very good question. Look, and we're going to do that right now here. So in version 4, let me just save this as a new version. You know what I have observed, which I didn't like, is whenever the value is null, it's still updating. And I don't want that. I can either do that here in this decision, but because when the field value is null, I actually don't want anything updated. I can do it right here. Let's do it that way. So I'm going to say, don't run this flow at all.
We have a question from Gabby too, when you have a second. Her question.
What's the question?
Feel free to come off mute if you want to, Gabby. It was, so do you even need not large or small?
Okay, good question. Now, what not large or small is, I just renamed it, is your default outcome of your decision that comes standard. You just label it, relabel it.
And now, if you don't do auto layout, that branch doesn't appear. Like it would be blank. It's a function of auto layout that it branches it for you.
Yes, if your decision is super simple, like for example, you're checking for null, you can, that happens quite a bit. Like when you do a get, for example, you try to find a record in your database and you want to check whether you found the record or not, because if you don't check for it, usually it causes a problem when you refer to it later on, and you might get an error message. So you'll have all these like is null decisions. If it's super simple and it's going to stay simple, you'll just say like, okay, well, is my value null? And then you'll leave the default. You won't actually create another decision outcome. You'll just leave it either is null or the default would be not null. I'll just rename it not null, something like that. Now, once you start building more complicated logic, like, well, is the revenue bigger than $1 million, smaller than $1 million? And there is potential for you to create additional outcomes. I actually leave this default as, unused right there, because that would be my fail-safe for none of these evaluating to true. In that case, I wouldn't actually take any action, right? And as I'm debugging and as I'm working with it, and I'll see whether, it's evaluating correctly or not. But in any case, if I get something wrong here, and then if I end up over here by accident, I just won't use that path and it doesn't do any updates. That's how I operate. But I mean, you can use it. So you can do it either large or either small. right? And we just found out, for example, here that null is also evaluating small, and we didn't like that. And we're going to take action according to that. So if you do large and everything else, then your null is going to also end up there. Then you start going, evaluating and creating additional decision outcomes. It gets a little bit more complicated. But I mean, this is a long answer. The short answer is you can use it. Yeah. You can do it large or default. Does that answer your question?
Gabby, I think he's asking you.
Yeah, I came in at the end, like halfway through the explanation, but yeah, I got the gist of it. Thank you. I just didn't know why we needed it because you've got the other two.
Oh yeah, well, if you're talking about this scenario where I already have the other two, why is this there? That is always there. That one is the default outcome. It was named default outcome, but I just renamed it. But I could have not used the small and then left that to the default outcome. Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, so now if I understand what you're saying, I didn't think I saw you do it, but you're gonna go up to the record trigger flow start and put the null value up there.
Yes.
So that it doesn't run, right?
Yes, that's
Gotcha.
exactly what I'm gonna do. I just took a little reroute for the other question. So,
Gotcha.
All right, so now we are going here, and then we're gonna say, you know what? I don't really like the fact that the account is updating as cold when the annual revenue field value is null. So I'm just going to account for that in my filter conditions, and I'm going to tell the flow not to run at all, so there won't be any update by definition. So I'm going to say annual revenue is null, true, and that's how you evaluate null. And then, well, I'm going to say is null is false, obviously, because if this evaluates true, then the flow will run. So the annual revenue is null is false, then the flow will run. And I'm going to save this. It looks active. I need to save it as a new version, I guess, and then activate it. And test this one now here. Create a new account. You see that the rating field value has not updated. Now, there is another way we can do this. I'm going to go back to my versions again. And I'm going to use version number 4 that didn't have the start condition entry criteria. Let me just confirm. Yeah, no entry criteria here. And I'm going to check for null here. Create null annual revenue account. Now, the important thing here to know, and I just mentioned this one briefly before, And here I need to check whether it evaluates to true. So this is my null. Now, the important thing here, I just mentioned this briefly before, the decision element is going to evaluate all these outcomes in sequence from top to bottom. So for something like this, I have to move this up so that I will catch it before I get here, because right now, null is included in small. But if I catch it here and then, get out of my decision element and do not put an update behind this, this is going to give me what I want. So now I have all these different outcomes. I have the null. I have the not large or small. These are not doing anything. And I have large and small here that are doing updates. So I can save this one. Oh, I think I saved this over version 4. Anyway, let me just create another new version so I don't confuse myself. So let's test this one and see if we get the same outcome as the last active version, which was actually ruling out running the flow at all. This time it's going to run, the flow is going to run, although the annual revenue is null, but still not gonna do anything. See here? Now, technically the difference, that was confusing for some of you before. Technically the difference is this. Your developer, the technical people, can get actually a log, can set up a trace on what's happening on your Salesforce org. And when they set up that trace and then look at what's happening, what's executing in your org, if your flow runs, they are going to see that the flow ran and executed. So, they are going to see a line item for that flow running, whatever that flow is called, and we called it rate large accounts worm, which we have changed a little bit. The naming is a little bit obsolete, but still they'll see this flow running in their logs. If we include exclusion criteria, which we have done in the previous version, where we said, okay, well, in the entry criteria, do not run this flow if annual revenue is null, they won't see a line item for this flow running at all. So it won't run. So the difference between two approaches is that in one version, the flow doesn't run at all. It evaluates the entry criteria, doesn't execute. In the other version, the flow runs, evaluates entry, evaluates decision, stops, doesn't do anything after that.
Hey, Andy.
Yeah.
Can we show everyone two things, since we're kind of talking about processing and error handling, where they would find the paused and failed interviews?
Yes.
And how they would get notified by email when there are exceptions, Apex or automation.
Okay.
If you don't know the second one, I know exactly where it is, so I could tell you.
Okay, what was the second question one more time?
The second one is, so in process builder world, when a process errored out, it would notify the person who created it. Mm-hmm. Now it's been updated where in the automation settings where you can notify, you could choose who gets notified.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I think those are two helpful things, especially for those who are not solo admins.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. Before we do that, let's actually go into, is that okay? Let's go into the actions and related records, because there's not that much of a possibility here to create errors as well. So
sure.
Let's do something with actions and related records and then mess it up. And then we'll go and look what we get for that, right? Okay. So far, any questions for field updates? No? Okay. So let me go back to the reason why I have created a field that I misspelled in the end, the purchasing budget, right? So what I want to do with that is this. I want to create a flow record triggered flow. That's going to create an opportunity on record creation when an account is created. And the purchasing budget is not null. So I'm evaluating whether the purchasing budget annual is null or not. If it's not null, I'm going to go into my actions in related records. The reason for that being is I want to create an opportunity, auto create an opportunity. Now, I cannot do that here because if I click on this, I'm not going to even see a create element presented to me. So I'm going to be here. And I'm going to say, I want to create opportunity. And this is going to be one record. And use separate values in resources. And the object is opportunity. And I'm going to set the field values here one by one. Opportunity name will be auto create and the stage is going to be prospecting. I'm going to leave it like this because this is going to be problematic here. Let me just show you that. So save auto create opportunity create flow. So let's debug this one. Skip start conditions and then create it. Well, I guess I need to let me just go to Dentco again. And then in Dentco, let me give this a purchasing budget of 200,000. And I'm going to point this to Dentco. I'm going to skip the start condition requirements and run this. Now, here on the right side, I'm going to see that my create opportunity failed. Why did it fail? Because we have required fields, right? And, you know, I haven't assigned any value to the close date. Close date is a required field. If I don't assign any value, it's going to end up in an error. Now, let's assume we haven't debugged this flow and we activated it directly, right? And I'm going to create an account here. and say account text. And I need to assign it a purchasing budget and save. And I'm going to get an error message here. We hit a snag, auto create opportunity, create on account flow, process failed. And the error message is required field missing, close date. You can look up in the exception code values and so on. Now this one, let's see if this ended up in the failed flow interviews. When I go here in my setup, I can see there is a screen called paused and failed flow interviews. Click on this one. This used to be only for paused interviews. Now we have also the ability to look at our failed flow interviews. And I'm going to see that the last run created an entry in here. And we didn't used to have that. This is really fantastic. We didn't have it in record triggered flows. It is a link directly to the failed flow interview, which will show you again the path that the flow took highlighted and where it failed. And then you'll also see the error message here. It's very similar, pretty much the same to your debug dialog. You can see here what the problem was. And this also creates let me just show you here, auto creates an email to your inbox.
What's great too is you can create other list views. So if you maybe roll out a new flow and you want to see in isolation if it's failing, you could create a list view for that specific flow and go to paused and failed and see, like, do I have any results? Or how many times is it failing?
Yeah. And here you can see that you received a long email about the failed flow interview. And it has failed. A couple of pointers here. First of all, this can be very long. It's very detailed. It's not easy to read, but this may have more detail than what you can see elsewhere. So it's important. One tip. The other tip, the error message that you have will be displayed up on top. But sometimes, as you scroll down and look at all your step, there you could have more detailed explanations here where it failed. So always look here also on the bottom, right? And if you want to really troubleshoot effectively, you're going to also have to learn to read through this and then see what the field values were at the time you experienced a problem. Because sometimes you're trying to assign like a text to a number field and things like that, whatever. You can clearly see what you're assigning to the field values when your update or create something like that failed. Any questions about this?
I'll just say having the debug piece in addition to the email makes it so much easier than debugging a process builder. So
Yeah.
for any of you process builder fans, in my opinion, it's way easier to debug a flow.
I could see the value in this for sure, Mary.
Yeah, I mean, workflow versus process. For simple things, you can prefer workflow. I totally understand that. I can see that. But I mean, right now, if you're preferring process over flow, it's just simply because you haven't really give it enough of a try yet, like on the flow side, because it's just so much better. And you know, the flow, like I told you, the flow gets complicated. It can get complicated, but the reason why it gets complicated is because it can do so much more. So if you isolate to your own limited, if you don't want to go complicated, limited functionality use case, then you can, and then it's not that complicated. All right, so the other thing you wanted to show, Mary, was
showing folks where they can set
Yeah.
who gets the error notifications.
Yes. So in your process automation settings, it's here, right?
Yes, you can do it there. I would also recommend,
Yeah.
there's also like Apex exception emails. That's usually what, yeah, Apex exception email recipients is the ideal one to use it. Because if you work on a team or if you've had an admin leave, it'll try and send to whoever created it. And in Apex exception emails, you can either use the email addresses not in Salesforce. So my team has a distribution list, so we use that. But above, you can just manually add users, which is usually what we do like in our sandbox. Well, like if one of us builds something, we'll just add ourselves and it's not notifying the whole team. It's just notifying us.
Yeah, if you're a team of admins, developers, multiple people touching, and if you like pain, you usually set up a distribution email list and then you bombard your email with it. But then you want to probably set up very good filters and, you know, separate those out in a folder or something like that.
I send mine all to a specific folder, and then I can search for the name of the flow or process in the folder and see, like, you know, if someone reports like yesterday I tried to do this, I can find yesterday in the email list and look through it and see what it is.
That's when including certain keywords in the label and things like that becomes important. Then you can actually separate out based on that. You can easily see which flow is failing on which object and things like that. Which brings me to a good point. Let me just show you the Explorer. It actually sounds quite impressive, right? The Flow Trigger Explorer. Just a second. So now we have built a before save and after save on the account. We can go to our Flow Trigger Explorer in Spring 22, and we can see when an account is created. We have flows that are set up to run before save and after save. So we have two different flows here in the before save area. This is from a session that I have done earlier, I guess. So this we haven't touched today, but it's inactive. And then we have this one that's active running before save. And we have this one running active after save. And we also can see if we have something that runs async. Now, right now, this will show you when an account record is created. You can pick an object here to look at in your Flow Trigger Explorer. You can pick whether you want to look at it created, updated, or deleted conditions. And then you can also see all these different flows running before save and after save. That's the reason why this is sequenced like this. Actually, that's how it runs in the system. So these ones actually kick in before these ones here operate. Now, another new functionality, which is quite advanced, so I'm just going to show you very briefly, is I can go to my flows now, and in the settings under the cog here, the gear sign, show advanced, I can give my flows a trigger order. So if I have multiple flows running after save or before save, you know, in the previous picture, we had 2 before save flows. If I activate them both, and I want to make sure that they actually run in a certain sequence, I want one always to run before the other, I can give a trigger order number here. And I can use 10, 20, things like that. You know, in the end, I can use any number from 1 to 2000 and sequence my automation that way. There was a constant debate on whether we should be using multiple flows triggering on the same account or not. And usually there are quite a number of experts that are saying, okay, you need to use a maximum 1 before, maximum 1 after. And they have their reasons for it. But this change right now that's implemented, this new functionality for Spring 22, shows Salesforce's intentions very, very clearly. They want to get to a world where we could run multiple before save and multiple after save flows triggering on the same object. And we get to determine the sequence that they trigger. They are trying to make this quite possible and easy for us to do.
Can you go back into the settings? There were a couple of things I wanted to point out.
Sure.
Sorry, into the gear with where you were. Okay. So a couple of things I think are helpful are if you see where it says API version for the running flow, about a year ago, Salesforce stopped bringing your processes and flows up to the most recent API version. So I would think about how you keep them updated. So it could be, you know, saving a new version and changing the API version from, say, 49, which I believe is where they stopped, to 54. For us, we've tried to put in the description the API version the version is saved as, so we can easily find it. I don't know of a great way at this point, but just keep that in mind. So if features roll out, like the trigger order that Andy was saying, or being able to like use a subflow in a particular type of flow, if you're on an older API that's before that feature rolled out, you can't use it. The other thing I think is interesting is where it says interview label, you can actually change what that says. So if it's helpful to add more detail or add more fields from the record, you can actually change that up. And that's what will display when you get your error handling emails.
Yeah. Well, actually, one important addition I would make to that is I use this a lot and I teach a lot. So if you want to change your flow from a record triggered flow to an auto launch flow or any type of other flow, you can do that by using the same dialog, and the same dialog pops up when you say, okay, I want to create a new flow instead of a new version here in your save as. And you can rename your flow. Let's say I want to make this an auto launched flow, and I would add here auto launched, name it. And in my show advanced dialog, you'll see similar settings. And you can say, now this flow, this new flow I'm creating should be auto-launched. And then you can select that and save it as that, which is going to give you some error messages that you need to attend to, and you'll need to make a couple of modifications, but it's still a good way of changing from one version to another. Sometimes for deployment purposes, sometimes even for testing purposes, because it's too hard to test in a record triggered flow, and it's going to be easier a little bit in auto launched or screen flow to do it. Now, the one thing that stumped me the other day, I don't know how I managed to do that, because right now it seemed to have auto updated. And I just remembered that, Mary, because you just talked about the interview label. I just managed to create a new flow like this. I think I must have done it as save as, and the interview label stayed as the old version. And I'm looking at the flow, the API name and the label says one thing, and in the failed flow interviews, my entry says something completely different. So I couldn't understand what was happening for a very, very long time. So if you specify something here, this one is the interview label that shows up in your failed flow interview. So that's a good feature if you use it correctly and intentionally. So do you have any questions? If you don't, let's go back and fix that actions and related records auto create opportunity, because we haven't done that yet. All right, let me just do that. So this is our flow that failed. I'm going to edit this flow. And this time I'm going to assign also a close date. And let me just show you a very simple formula as well. And that'll show you how you work with formulas. So I can actually start typing a date here. So let's say I want this to have the close date of 30th of January, 2022. I can totally do that. Or I can actually create a formula that will pass a value to this field. And the way I would do that is I can either create my formula beforehand here and I can pick it here, or I can just click on this new resource. And when I click on new resource, I would have to create a formula. And let me just call this close date formula. And this is going to be of type date. And I can create a formula here very similar to formula fields or formulas inside process. The builder is a little bit different. And I can use either field values or global variables that are made available to me. And in this case, I'm going to use a global variable that's called $flow. And under $flow, I get to use the current date or the current date or time, the date and time of when the flow runs. So I'm going to use the flow current date and add 30 days to it. So this is going to be my formula, and I'm going to save this as a new version and activate it. And go back to my accounts. Account name, purchasing budget, 33K, and save. And now here, I'm going to see that the account was created without any problems. I didn't receive an error message or a warning. And I see that the purchasing budget is 33,000. If I look at my related list, I don't actually see an opportunity that was created. It didn't work. What did I miss? Create opportunity. Let's debug this one. Oh, I created an opportunity, but I didn't associate it with the account. Oh, geez, rookie mistake. Sorry. So let's go to my opportunities. Yes, my auto-created opportunity is here. And if I look at the lookup on my opportunity for the account, I have not populated it. I haven't told Salesforce in my flow that these two need to be associated. So now I need to save this as a new version and populate my lookup field. And my lookup field on the opportunity is going to be called account ID. And this account ID needs to be set to the account that's triggering the flow, which means the dollar record ID. Save, activate, accounts, new, purchasing budget, 44K, let's say. No errors. And in my related lists, now I can see the opportunity that was created. It's associated with the account name purchasing budget 44K with the close date of 2/7, which is 30 days from now, 2/7/2022. Any questions, folks?
No questions in the chat.
Okay. I think this probably makes up a good session. Is there?
Do we have a question? It looks like someone came off mute. Nancy, do you have a question?
Nope, I'm just enjoying the session, learning good stuff. Thank you.
Great.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi. Hello, my Florida homie.
Well, Nancy has been following my sessions for a very long time. Thanks for following, Nancy.
I'm a groupie. I'm your groupie.
I can see why, Nancy. I think you've got a new groupie here, Andy, and me.
Thank you.
I know Andy mentioned it at the beginning, but just a reminder, Andy teaches classes on Flow. So he's been gracious enough to come visit us today and talk about specifically about record triggered flows. But Andy, what are good ways if people want more information from you to potentially take your class or follow you?
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks for the reminder. First of all, I have already said and committed that we are going to give away one free access for the Udemy course. How should we determine that, Mary? I mean, you get to determine.
If you give me a minute, I'm going to throw up a wheel of names. So I'm going to do everyone that's currently here. So don't drop off just yet. Hang on.
Okay. So now I have a YouTube channel and I have a Udemy class. I do bunch of sessions like this, and I have just put up a website as well to bring everything together. It's called salesforcebreak.com, and when you go on salesforcebreak.com, you are going to see it's linked to the Udemy class, to the YouTube channel, and there is link to a Slack workspace. I have created a Slack workspace. We have about 260 or 270 folks who might have taken my classes, YouTube channel, might have watched the YouTube channel videos or Udemy class. So, or, you know, they might have just found me on the internet. I answer daily questions on Flow. So if you start trying things and then you get stuck, that's where you ask your questions. You can obviously ask them on Ohana Slack, on Answers, many places, but you know, that's one space I'm trying to support and foster, especially for new learners, because what I've been observing in Ohana Slack and in some other spaces is that the questions that are being asked and the answers have been getting more and more difficult and complicated, which gives me the impression that it could be a little bit intimidating for people to ask let's say, basic questions. The one rule that we have for Ohana's workspace, not Ohana, the Salesforce Break workspace on Slack, is that there are no silly questions. There are no stupid questions. You can ask anything you want. And if you're into the Udemy class, if you want to do the Udemy class, you don't win the raffle today. The discounted link is always on my Twitter profile, which I shared with you, and they do sales frequently that actually beat even my discounted price. So you can also get those. Just go on Udemy, and it's called the Lightning Salesforce Flows, Salesforce Lightning Flows, and it's rated at 4.5. We already have, I think, about 1,500 students on there. So yeah, the engagement and the support has been quite good. The reception was quite good for the Udemy class. And it's a crazy person's business to try to keep content updated on Flows, because Salesforce implements changes and improvements quite rapidly, but I'm trying to do that. So I actually go back and update the Udemy course. And I continue putting out free content on YouTube as well. You don't really have to get the Udemy course. It's just a much more structured and efficient way of learning Flows.